The autumn wind rattled the hand-built farmhouse on Shoulder Blade, sweeping down from the breathed county ridges into the Holler. True to mountain ways, the Spencers had always raised many children, a sprawling kin of sons and daughters who worked the steep tobacco patches, cleared the timber, and tended the farm from dawn until dusk. It was 1910, and though the Louisville and Nashville Railroad had brought modern commerce and electric lamplights to the edge of the Kentucky River, old mountain superstitions died harder than the timber cleared from the hills. At 30 years old, America Spencer sat alone in her bedroom. The faint sounds of horse-drawn buggies rolling along the gravel, fading into the damp night. She dwelled upon a memory of her fiancé, Samuel, who proposed to her on a swinging bridge over the North Fork of the Kentucky River just a month ago. In her lap lay a heavy satin black dress, this garment that carried the weight of generations. Long before the Spencers had packed their meager belongings to migrate westward from a quiet Quaker colony in Virginia back in 1812. By the strict, unwritten codes, America was bound to wear only black for at least 6 months following her fiancé Samuel's tragic passing, signaling her grief to the bustling town. But the old-timers whispered a darker truth over their coffee. The heavy, dark fabric acted as a shroud, meant to trick a lingering spirit into thinking you were already part of the earth, keeping it from recognizing you too quickly in the dark. America raised her eyes to the vanity mirror. Per local custom, every glass surface in the house had been draped with sheets the moment Samuel died, lest a wandering soul get trapped behind the reflection. But tonight, a corner of the sheet over her vanity had slipped, exposing a narrow vertical slit of silver glass. In that cold sliver of mirror, America didn't just see her own pale face framed in the black satin. Standing directly behind her shoulder, stark and sharp against the wallpaper, was the reflection of Samuel. He wasn't wearing his Sunday church coat. He wore the wet, turned-up clay of the hillside cemetery, and his hollow eyes were locked entirely on the heavy black fabric of her dress. America froze, her blood turning to ice. She remembered the old warning from the hollows. If you wear the black too long or mourn too loud, the veil between this world and the dirt wears paper thin. In the glass, Samuel's mouth curved into a slow, rigid smile. A heavy, dirt-stained hand reached out from the empty air, its icy fingers gently brushing against the black satin of her sleeve. Join me, darling, at midnight. A dry whisper hissed against the nape of her neck, smelling faintly of river mud and rotting pine. Panic seizing her chest, America slammed her hand against the glass, pulling the white sheet entirely down to plunge the room into absolute darkness. But the whisper followed her, sliding down her spine like freezing water. She sat trembling in the pitch black, her breath shallow and fast, realizing with a paralyzing terror that her 6 months of mourning had only just begun, and the dead had already started counting down the days. Without a second thought, she turned and bolted from the room, slammed the bedroom door shut tight, fleeing down the hallway and out of the house as if the hounds of hell were snapping at her heels. Outside, on the porch, the oil lamps flickered and died, one by one, leaving the entire home in a suffocating, unnatural dark. The rest of the night, she huddled in the freezing parlor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. As the weeks dragged on, America tried desperately to return to the rhythms of Jackson Town. She walked down the local mercantile, traded polite nods with neighbors along the river, and dutifully wore her heavy black satin dress every single day, counting down the agonizing timeline of her 6 months of mourning. Yet, as the months bled away, she realized the old mountain warnings were not mere old wives' tales. Every night, no matter how securely she locked the bedroom door, the scent of damp clay and rotting pine would slowly creep under the door. She would hear heavy, wet footsteps pacing right outside the parlor door. Worse still, every reflective surface in the house, from the window panes at twilight to the polished copper kettle in the kitchen, began to show a fleeting glimpse of Samuel, standing right behind her, his form growing clearer, denser, and more real with each passing week. When the final day of the 6th month finally arrived, America breathed a tremendous sigh of relief. The calendar on the wall marked the exact end of her mourning period. The custom was finished. Tomorrow, she could finally take off the black dress, put on a garment of lavender or gray, and signal to the town that she was returning to the land of the living. That evening, exhausted but triumphant, just before midnight, she retired to her bedroom. The heavy black dress suffocatingly hot as she unbuttoned it, letting it pool like a puddle of ink upon the floor. She sat at her vanity, reached out, and boldly ripped the white sheet off the mirror for the first time in half a year, eager to see her own unshadowed face in the glass. The mirror cleared. America gasped. Her own reflection was gone. In its place stood Samuel, fully manifested in the room, his cold, dirt-caked arms wrapping tightly around her waist from behind. His voice rasped in her ear, no longer a whisper, but heavy and solid as the earth itself. "You're coming home with me now." Before she could scream, the glass of the mirror shattered outward. The darkness of the room swallowed her whole. The night settled behind the Breathitt County ridges. Skeletal shadows cast over the weathered farmhouse on Shoulder Blade. Down the holler, her brother Hiram trudged up the gravel path, a lantern swinging from his calloused hand. He'd noticed the oil lamps unlit as midnight settled over the valley. A strange, lingering stillness hanging over the property that felt too deep, too absolute for a living home. Stepping onto the porch, Hiram rapped his knuckles firmly against the heavy oak front door. "America," he called out, his voice swallowed by the falling night. "Are you there?" No sound answered him, only the dry rustle of dead leaves scraping across the floorboards. The door wasn't latched. It gave way with a soft, groaning creak under his palm. Inside, the house smelled overwhelmingly of damp earth and rotting pine, as if the forest floor itself had swallowed the parlor. Hiram stepped cautiously into the hallway, his boots loud against the pine planks until he reached the bedroom. The door stood wide open, framing the dim, twilight-lit interior. America sat motionless in front of the vanity. The white sheet lay torn to shreds on the floorboards, and the tall mirror, once draped in reverence, now stared back with a jagged starburst fracture across its center, catching the glowing light of the lantern. "America," Hiram breathed, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The heavy black satin morning dress lay pooled upon the floor where she had cast it off the night before, and she wore only a simple pale undergarment. Her pale hands rested calmly in her lap, her eyes wide and fixed in a glassy, eternal stare at the glass, and her skin bore the faint, grayish pale of winter frost. When Hiram cautiously stepped forward and placed a trembling hand upon her shoulder, he recoiled instantly. She was as cold and heavy as a block of river stone. By nightfall, the hushed whispers of Jackson Town swept through the valley like a cold wind. Neighbors gathered outside of the farmhouse, shaking their heads with solemn pity as the county doctor pulled a white sheet over America's face. The townsfolk said she simply couldn't go on another day, that the crushing weight of a lonely heart and 6 months of grief had finally broken her spirit, driving her to slip quietly out of the world to join her only love in the cold Kentucky clay. None of them looked too closely at the vanity mirror as the evening shadows lengthened, draped across the bottom of the shattered glass like a heavy shadow. The unmistakable reflection of the black satin dress. As the mourners dispersed and the shadows stretched long across the floorboards, her grieving family set about putting the house in order. With hushed reverence and heavy hands, they gathered the traditional black satin dress from where it pooled on the floor, smoothing its creases with trembling fingers. Through every generation of hard labor, isolation, and mountain grit, the heavy mourning dress remained a sacred heirloom. It had been handed down directly to America from her grandmother, Florinda Spencer, who had worn it through her own winters of loss in the Holler. Her family folded the heavy fabric carefully, sealing away the lingering scent of river mud and pine, and placed it deep within the cedar trunk at the foot of the bed as the heavy wooden lid descended It swallowed the last sliver of twilight, sealing the dress away in the dark. In the quiet stillness of the room, the cedar trunk seemed to hold its breath, guarding the threads of generations past until another daughter of the ridge would have need of its sorrow.